Hello everyone, 3.5's beta is out and oh boy, we got some nasty units to go over. The question is, will these two units be Phainon and the dot saver everyone's hoping for? Well, that's what we're here to figure out today. But before we jump into it, I do want to mention this is version 1, so it is subject to change, which I'll probably cover down the line though. Also, thanks for 3k subs guys, I'll be sure to make more awesome videos. But with that out the way, let's see how Cerydra works and how strong she is. Cerydra is a wind harmony that functions as a hypercarry support and a sub DPS. Yeah, a weird combination, but hey, it's 2025. While her buffs in total are actually not too impressive, her unique mechanic is what separates her from the pack. Before we can see what that is, we gotta look at the boring stuff first. Looking at her base stats, she has above average HP and defense, which doesn't really matter. Her speed is also average, which also doesn't matter. So what the hell matters? Well, that would be her attack, which is actually pretty average. Moving to her traces, we can see that she has wind damage bonus to support her sub DPS potential and attack to help her buffing and damage. The HP is whatever. Here's her basic and it's nothing special. Moving on to her skill, this is where Cerydra's main gimmick lies, and oh boy does it do a lot of things. So let's break it down. When Cerydra uses her skill on one ally, she grants them military merit, which I will reference as MM throughout the video. MM users will get various buffs which I'll soon cover. But going back to point B though, she gains 1 charge, which has a cap of 8. So what do these charges do? Well, looking at point C, when she has 6 charges, the ally with MM gains nobility instead. After which, for 1 turn, they gain various effects. First, it'll remove all the crowd control debuffs. Second, they'll gain 72 skill crit damage. And third, they'll trigger Coup de Main. While it doesn't say it anywhere at the moment, what Coup de Main does is that it copies whatever the skill was and does it again. So with Phainon, it just lets him pull a moderate and throws out 2 meteors. Anaxa, it lets him shoot out 4 shots cause why not? Yeah, this is a very strong gimmick but only lasts for 1 turn. So if your skill is weak or you cannot gain a lot of stacks very fast, this is not going to be that good. But for those who can abuse this, it's gonna be pretty damn strong. Next is her ult. All is chest, checkmate in 4. Well, for 130 cost ult, here she'll deal 240% of her attack to all enemies and gain 2 charge. If there isn't an MM user, which should never be the case by the way, she'll grant the first unit in the team the buff. Looking at her current kit, it's still pretty barren. An extra skill and crit damage buff every so often, and her ult, which while it does have a good multiplier, won't be that impactful if she doesn't have self buffs. So let's check her talent, Glory to the Imperator. Here, the MM user will get 24% of Cerydra's attack. Now, how much will we expect to get from this? Well, using Robin as a comparison, who gives 22.8% attack and a flat 200, we should be expecting at least 1000 attack from this, which should translate to roughly 90 to 120% attack, which is very good by the way. Next is point Y, which is how Cerydra will be gaining most of her charges. Here, for every basic or skill the MM user does, she gains 1 stack. So someone like Anaxa would be generating 2 stacks every attack, and Archer could gain multiple due to firing multiple shots. Moving on to the stipulations, we can see that there can only be 1 MM user, and switching users will reset the charges. So as you can see, she is designed for a hyper carry team. Let's now talk about her traces. Her trace 1, Conquer, grants her supporting ally and herself 20 speed for 3 turns after she uses her skill. This is honestly pretty cool as you can mess with speed tuning stuff and run attack boots on both her and the DPS. Wait, run her with attack boots too? Yeah, the thing is, she realistically doesn't need to be that fast. While you could run a super fast Cerydra spamming skills to get the max charges, you could also have a super SP positive one as she doesn't really need to cast her skill besides getting that additional energy and 1 charge. It'll really be up to you, but she can be either Omega SP positive or negative, but the freedom is yours, which is really cool. What's nice is that the second part of the trace gives her energy every time her supported ally attacks, which further helps build a case for the SP positive and slow Cerydra. Her trace 2 gives her 100 crit rate, which seems to be the norm nowadays. This of course is a lot of stats, which is what lets her ult deal actual damage. Point B also basically gives 1 extra charge during a fight, which isn't that impactful. Back to Cerydra, she has the attack, and also now has the crit rate from her trace too, but we're still missing the damage. That's where Trace 3 comes in. TLDR, she gets 360 crit damage after she reaches the cap of 4k attack. So yes, she gets 460 CV in her base kit. Next is her technique, First Move Advantage. Here, the active character which starts the battle will have military merit, and they will cast a free skill at the start of the turn. This is unironically the best technique in the game. While you could use it for your DPS, which certain characters like Acheron use during their technique should, for teams that don't have combat techniques, yeah, we're just putting this on our supports. Let's just whip it on a Robin so she can turn one ult without any funny business. There's probably a lot that you can do with this, so let's just wait and see what the theory crafters can do. Before looking at her Eidolons, let's quickly look at her light cone. Here it grants her 64% attack, recovers 1 SP after ulting, and gives 54% skill damage bonus for 3 turns to an ally she buffs. This is really strong and there's not much else that needs to be said for her. I do want to point out this is a great OG Tingyun light cone and also works partially on Robin, which is pretty funny. Finally, let's quickly go over her Eidolons, which are a mix of support and personal damage. Her E1 gives her ally Death Shred and some more Death Shred when they're in the nobility state. Nothing too crazy. E2 gives the MM ally 40 damage bonus, which isn't a lot, but Cerydra, if there is an MM ally, now gives 160 damage bonus, which finishes her kit right up. She has attack, crit rate, crit damage, and now damage bonus. While this Eidolon isn't too crazy in terms of support, it's still really cool. E4 doubles her damage outright via her multiplier and is likely the strongest E4 in regards to personal damage amp. The bar is honestly pretty low given to how E4s are generally kinda dookie, but still it's very impressive. Her E6 is pretty stupid though. Firstly, the MM ally will gain 20 respen, and if there is an MM ally, Cerydra also gains 20 respen, and nothing too special. But taking a page out of Robin's book, she now deals additional damage based on 360% of her attack after the MM ally attacks. For reference, this is triple the scaling Robin normally has, excluding how she has way more crit damage and damage bonus via E2. This also can only be triggered 20 times, which will reset after ult. Regardless, it is definitely E6 worthy. Looking at everything overall at E0, she gives roughly 1000 attack, 20 speed, and sometimes a double skill with 72 crit damage. And in regards to personal stats, 100 crit rate and 360 crit damage. So now that we know her kit, let's see how the meta will likely shift using my personal tier list, which is derived from Pride Wins. By the way, they really need to remove that E0 S0 label because it's clearly tailored towards E0 S1 and above, which is pretty obvious seeing how they have hardly any data with E0 and free to play light cones. Not to mention how they moved Blade up before the buffs and with a quote-unquote E0 S0 Hysilens. Okay, but back to my chart. Now, I have to explain the changes before moving to Cerydra and her impact. I have combined the tier 0.5 and 1 for the DPS and support category because they likely will be performing roughly the same. And with the DPSs, they will beat their peers in environments they excel at. Yunli and Boothill could be tier 0 against things like Kool-Aid, but that's not every day, you know? So again, I will just put everyone in tier 1. Now, moving on, of course, the collab units will be tier 0, and the buffed 1.x DPSs will all move up to my tier 1 spot, while Silver would be a tier 0 sub DPS and support. Some other supports have moved around too, like Hanya, which I believe should be tier 1.5. As for Cerydra, she's tier 0, who would have guessed. She will make Phainon the strongest DPS in the game without a doubt. And Anaxa, while he deserves to be tier 0 without Cerydra's help, with her help, he's definitely staying up there. Archer also could use Cerydra, but he's still tier 0 regardless. Moving on, we now have Hysilens, and perhaps you saw her earlier on the tier list, and can assume that she's pretty strong, so let's see why that's the case. Hysilens is a physical nihility that works very similar to Black Swan, that being a DPS and a debuffer that amps damage. And just like Black Swan, she cannot detonate dots, unless you get her E1, but that's a spoiler. Now she does have some pretty weird wording, but is pretty simple when you break it all down. But of course, let's cover the base stats first. In terms of stats, she is quite literally average on everything. Her attack, speed, energy, everything. For her traces however, she does get the 3 useful stats or dots. Yes, even affect hit rate, as we'll later see. We can now move on to her kit, starting with her basic, Ballad in Still Waters. just like any basic, there's nothing special. Next is her skill. When Hysilens skill, she attacks all enemies and inflicts 20% vulnerability for 3 turns. This is similar to Black Swan, who instead inflicts Defense Shred. Now, while this doesn't do that much compared to something like Kafka's skill, which detonates dots, you likely will be using this skill a majority of the time, as you will really want that extra energy for her ultimate, as that's where a majority of her damage will be coming from. Speaking of her ult, when Hysilens ults, she will deploy a zone similar to Jiaoqiu or Trippy. Here, enemies will lose 15% attack and 25% defense, which pairs really nicely with Black Swan and a dot relic set's defense shred. Now, point Y is the most important thing to look at. When an enemy takes dot damage, Hysilens will subsequently deal 80% of her attack as dot damage to the enemy. Now, that's pretty tiny, but as we can see, this can trigger up to 8 times per instance. So what does that exactly mean? Well, let's say the enemy had 5 dots on him, which Kafka detonates. Thus, you'll deal 5 instances of 80% attack to said enemies. Now, I'm not a dot expert, but assuming you can get all 8 instances, that's a 640% multiplier. Kafka, for reference, sits at 290%, and Black Swan with 50 Arcana stacks is at 840%, so it's definitely on the high end. There is one issue however, and it's that she does have a 130 ult cost, and her ult only lasts 3 turns. Even if you skill every time, we're still falling a little short of 100% uptime, and even needing to get hit once for a 4-turn ult. Moving to her talent, it's super weird wording wise, but basically, when Hysilens attacks an enemy, she will have a 100% base chance of implanting a dot that is currently not applied to them. Now, this dot actually doesn't deal any damage at all, and is mostly used for the ult count, but the second half of this talent does do damage. Here, if the enemy has dot inflicted on them, she'll deal the respective dot type damage. So if they have wind shear, she'll deal an additional 25% wind dot, or if they have shock, she'll deal an additional 25% lightning dot. Now, it's because of this fact, plus some other stuff in her kit, that I believe that she should be running attack orb rather than physical damage bonus, as it likely will not be impacting these 3 different dots. Now, as you can see, physical dot is currently separated. Here, she will deal 20% of the enemy's max HP, which sounds pretty OP, but it's capped at 25% of her attack. Yeah, I have no idea why they did this, as it's literally just dot with extra steps. Like, if it was 2% max HP with no cap, that'd be awesome, but this ain't it. Overall, her talent is mostly used for the ult count, with these other dots being pretty tiny PP damage. Moving to her traces, her trace 1 has her ult field now being up for 3 turns when entering battle. This actually is super nice, as when comparing to someone like Black Swan, who will generally take 2 turns to ult, aka missing out on a lot of early damage, Hysilens won't have the same issue. Her trace 2 now allows allies to implant her talent's dot. Not much else needs to be said. Hysilens trace 3 gives her an effect hit rate to damage percent conversion, which is very similar to how Kafka's trace works. After 60% effect hit rate, for every 10% Hysilens has over that, she'll gain 15% damage percent, which caps out after you hit 120 effect hit rate. Now, in a vacuum, this is a scam, as you are needing 120 effect hit rate for just 90 damage bonus, which is not 1.5 times as efficient, as remember, you need to hit 60 just to start to get that bonus. But because Kafka has such a good conversion trace, which I predicted Hysilens would give herself damage percent as Kafka gave attack, you still need to hit that 75% threshold anyway, so getting to 120 shouldn't be that much of an issue. Next is her technique, which inflicts 2 dot states from her talent, which again helps stacks the dots for her ult count. Before we talk about her Eidolons, let's quickly go over Lycone, a thing with coronation. Here, the user will gain 40% effect hit rate, but the main draw is the second half of the Lycone. Enemies hit by the user will be inflicted with enthrallment, and basically, if the wearer applies a debuff on said enthralled enemy, they will gain a dot vulnerability, up to 30%. Also, when allies hit the enemies with enthrallment, they will gain 10% speed for 3 turns, which is pretty cool. Now, I want to talk about the vulnerability real quick, as it's generally not a straight up 30% damage increase. Assuming you have Black Swan and her ult up, and also have used Hysilens skill, this will actually be a 20.7% damage increase, which is still really good by the way, but again, it's not 30%. Now, moving to her Eidolons, she actually has a really strong E1. When using her ultimate, she now detonates all dots for 150% of the original damage, which Kafka's buffed ult is just 120%. Also, when she ults, she gains a skill point, which is great in a dot team because it's so SP hungry. E2 is very simple and is just a 20% rush shred, which is fantastic as dot generally does not have rest pen besides E1 Black Swan, so it usually doesn't get that diluted. E4 is also very simple and now has Hysilens sharing her damage boost from her Trace 3 when her ult field is up though. TLDR, she can give up to 90% damage bonus to all allies, which is much better than most E4s. E6 increases her ult count by 4, so a total of 12. To compensate for the increase in the cap, Hysilens now has the chance to double dot implant. Just remember though that these new dots themselves will not be dealing damage, but rather they just increase the ult count so that does more damage. So just imagine us adding another 320% multiplier to the ult, which should in theory be close to a 50% damage increase, excluding the talent's dot. And that's her entire kit. Let's just quickly get a recap on what she does though. She inflicts 20% vulnerability, 25% defense shred, and 15% attack shred, and has a 640% dot multiplier via her ult, and a 100% dot multiplier via her talent. And finally, she gives herself up to 90% damage bonus via her trace. Overall, she's honestly pretty good and serves as a great third unit for dot. While her debuff should roughly equate to around a 45% damage increase, which is pretty low when compared to someone like Ruan Mei, who generally can increase their damage by around 82%, Hysilens, however, will be adding a lot of her own personal damage. At the same time, she does have some questionable things in her kit, like her talent, which I believe should be changed. And also, I hope she does get an ult buff with an ult cost reduction because as of now, her team will be super SP intensive, and she still really can't get a 3-turn ult. Now, looking at my tier list, I think it would be pretty fair to put her at 0.5 tier, seeing how she has constant debuffs and damage unlike Black Swan. Black Swan also performs worse when the enemies are fast, which is pretty scuffed for Dot's archetype, which Hysilens will not have an issue with. However, with Hysilens' introduction, Black Swan should be moving up a tier. Kafka, however, in my opinion, should still sit near that 0.5 and tier 1 range, even with Hysilens' introduction. I believe that Dot won't be OP like some of our new archetypes or DPSs, but the team will still sit at a comfortable spot for some time. I was also thinking that Dot would reach tier 0 with Hysilens, but I guess not. They now need the final piece of the puzzle, which would be their sustain, which hopefully can action advance the enemies, but until then, being near the top of the meta would still be a pretty good spot for them. And yeah, that's the entire video. I'm curious on what you guys think of the new 3.5 characters, so just leave your thoughts in the comments. I will respond a bit later than usual because I really need some sleep. I've worked on this all night and am pretty tired right now. I do want to end the video off by saying, thank you so much for watching, and may we meet again after the 33,550,336 cycle. Just kidding, I haven't done 3.3 yet.